Welcome to Bookfulness. This is episode 21. Last time, we finished up Unit 4, looking at macroevolution, the really big picture stuff.
The grand sweep of life, yeah.
Exactly. So today, we're kicking off our final unit, Unit V, and we're diving deep into, well, us, our own origin story.
It's chapter 21 from the text, The Evolutionary Story of Homo sapiens. And it really is an epic story. We're talking, 7 million years of evolution here?
Right, starting way back with the ancestors we share with apes, tracing all those branches and changes that led to modern humans.
Yeah, we'll also get into the agricultural revolution, which sounds like progress, but maybe wasn't entirely the best thing for us in some ways.
That's a hook right there. So our goal today is really to unpack this whole lineage. We want you to come away with a solid grasp of what makes us human.
And maybe bust a few myths, like what actually came first, the big brain or walking upright? It's not always what you'd think.
And we'll also tackle that tricky concept of human variation and why biologists find the term race isn't actually that useful when you look at the genetics.
Yeah, the data tells a different story than, old classifications.
We should also mention Darwin's early ideas about where humans came from. He had some surprisingly accurate predictions.
He really did. Okay, one quick practical note before we jump in. We'll be mentioning quite a few figures from the book, like figure 21.4 comparing skeletons, or 21.6 showing the hominin bush.
Right, and to help you visualize all that, we've put a link in the description where you can find a file with all those figures. It'll definitely help make sense of the anatomical stuff we're discussing.
Definitely check that out if you can. Okay, ready to dive into 7 million years.
Let's do it. Okay, so starting right at the beginning, before we even get to hominins, the chapter reminds us, with figure 21.1, that this whole story is nested within the bigger tree of life.
That's such a crucial point. We share common ancestry with everything. Bacteria, oak trees, blue whales, us. We're just one, admittedly very interesting twig on that enormous tree.
We're not separate from it.
Not at all. Now, zooming into our particular branch, the hominins, that's the lineage that includes us and all our ancestors since we split off from the chimpanzee lineage.
And that split happened about 7 million years ago.
Roughly, yes. About 7 Amoya. And it's kind of wild to think that out of all the diversity that must have existed in that lineage over millions of years, only one species is left standing today.
Homo sapiens. Us.
Just us.
So if we want to picture what that common ancestor back around 7 billion years ago might have been like, who do we look to for clues? Our closest living relatives.
Exactly. The African great apes, chimpanzees, and bonobos are our closest cousins. Comparing our anatomy, our behavior, our social structures with theirs gives us the best baseline for figuring out what changed and maybe why.
Okay, so anatomically, what are the key differences? What did that ancestor likely have that we've mostly lost?
Well, think about how apes move. Their arms are typically longer than their legs, great for climbing and swinging through trees, right?
Yeah, arboreal life.
And while they can walk upright, maybe for short bursts.
Like carrying something.
Exactly. But it's not their main way of getting around. That's usually knuckle walking. And then there are the feet. A key difference.
They're more like hands.
Pretty much. They have an opposable big toe, just like our thumb.
Wow.
It's fantastic for grasping branches, giving them dexterity in the trees. Our feet are totally different, rigid, arched platforms for support, not for grasping.
So a very different toolkit for moving around.
Completely, reflecting a very different lifestyle.
But it's not just the bones, is it?
Mm-hmm.
The book points to figure 21.3, showing that chimps have some pretty impressive cognitive abilities and even culture.
Oh, absolutely. We see remarkable stuff. They use tools quite deliberately, cracking nuts with stones they've selected as anvils, modifying twigs to fish termites out of mounds.
That requires planning.
It does. Foresight, problem solving.
Hmm.
They hunt cooperatively. They can be deceptive. And maybe most importantly for our story, think about language.
Can apes use language?
Well, captive apes, like bonobos and chimps, have shown they can learn sign language or use symbols, like lexicograms on a board, to communicate quite complex ideas. It suggests the basic neurological wiring for symbolic communication was already present in that common ancestor 7 million years ago.
Wow, so the foundations were laid way back then.
Seems like it. The potential was there.
And their social lives are interesting too. Chimps and bonobos, they look pretty similar, but the book says their societies are really different.
Radically different. Chimpanzee groups often have lots of conflict, very clear male dominance hierarchies, and sadly, sometimes lethal violence between groups.
Right.
Bonobos, on the other hand, they're famous for using sex to manage social situations. Lots of non-reproductive sexual behavior seems to diffuse tension, build bonds, resolve conflicts. People sometimes call them the make love, not war apes.
That's a huge difference in social strategy.
It is, and it shows how even closely related species can evolve very different social systems, probably based on things like resource availability or environmental pressures. It highlights the range of possibilities that existed back then.
Okay, let's unpack this core human thing then. Bipedalism. Walking on two legs. It feels like the most obvious physical difference.
It's certainly one of the most profound, moving from a life spent partly in trees, moving on all fours on the ground, to becoming obligate upright walkers. That required a massive re-engineering of our skeleton over millions of years.
The book lists 6 key features distinguishing us from apes. Bipedalism adaptations are first, but what are the others again?
Right, so after bipedalism adaptations, we have things like our specialized opposable thumbs, much more dexterity than apes, a modified vocal tract for complex speech, a higher reproductive rate, a higher metabolic rate, which we'll get back to, and a really long childhood.
Very long childhood.
Unusually long. But yeah, let's focus on bipedalism first because the skeletal changes are so dramatic. Figure 21.4 really lays it out.
So if you're looking at fossils, what screams this individual walked upright? What are the key skeletal tells?
There are 3 main areas you'd look at. First, how the head sits on the spine. In us, the hole where the spinal cord enters the skull, the foramen magnum, is positioned right underneath the skull, centered.
Okay, why does that matter?
It means your head balances neatly on top of your vertical spine. Doesn't take much muscle effort to hold it up. In apes, that hole is further back. If they stand up, they need big neck muscles just to keep looking forward. It's inefficient for sustained upright posture.
Ah, so it's an energy-saving thing, too. Less muscle strain just holding your head up.
Exactly. Frees up energy. Second big change, the pelvis. This is huge. The human pelvis is short, broad, and shaped like a bowl.
Compared to the apes, which is?
Long and narrow. Our bowl shape does 2 crucial things. Provides a stable base for the upper body, and really importantly, it changes how the gluteal muscles attach and work.
Our butt muscles.
Yeah. Specifically, gluteus medius and minimus. In us, they work to keep our torso stable over the leg that's on the ground when we're swinging the other leg forward. Stops us from wobbling side to side. The ape pelvis just isn't built for that kind of stabilization during walking.
Okay, head position, pelvis shape. What's the third?
The foot. We talked about the ape foot being like a hand with that grasping big toe. The human foot gave that up completely.
For stability.
For stability and efficiency, our foot is a rigid, arched structure. It acts like a spring, absorbing shock, and then providing a powerful lever to push off with each step. Losing the opposable toe means we're terrible climbers compared to apes, but it makes long-distance walking efficient.
So, a clear trade-off. Grasping ability for walking stability.
A major evolutionary trade-off driven by selection favoring life on the ground.
Okay, moving beyond the skeleton. The book also highlights our reproductive strategy as being quite different, linked to that long childhood you mentioned.
Yeah, this is a really interesting life history difference. Human babies are born relatively large, but they're incredibly helpless compared to other primate infants.
Why so helpless?
It's partly a consequence of bipedalism, actually. A narrower birth canal makes it harder to pass a large head. So human babies are born neurologically quite immature. Their brains are only about 25% of adult size at birth.
And they need a long time to grow and learn.
A very long time. Full brain growth and acquiring all the complex skills needed takes, what, maybe 18 years or so? That's a massive period of dependency.
It sounds like a huge burden, evolutionarily speaking.
Mm-hmm.
How did we manage that and achieve a higher potential population growth rate than chimps?
That's the paradox. The key seems to be a decoupling in the female reproductive cycle. A female chimp typically nurses her infant for maybe 4 or 5 years. During that time, lactation hormones usually suppress ovulation. So there's a built-in 5-year gap, roughly, between births.
Okay.
Human females are different. They can conceive again while still caring for older, dependent children. They don't have that same mandatory hormonal block.
So they can have children closer together.
Potentially, yes. Shorter birth spacing is possible, which means all else being equal resource availability, social support human populations have the potential to grow much faster than chimpanzee populations.
And that difference must have become really important later on when humans started spreading out.
Absolutely. That potential for faster growth played a big role in our global expansion.
Okay, so we've established bipedalism as the foundational shift. But the next really dramatic chapter is about the brain. Figure 21.5 kind of hints at just how significant this was.
Oh, it's the defining feature, arguably. The enormous brain. It's the source of everything we consider uniquely human abstract thought, complex language, planning, culture, self-awareness.
But it didn't come cheap, right? We mentioned the energy cost.
Exactly. It's incredibly expensive to run, metabolically speaking, and that cost had to be paid for somehow throughout our evolution. We'll definitely circle back to how we manage that.
It's interesting, though, that the basic idea of where humans originated was figured out quite early, even before many key fossils were found. Darwin had a strong inkling back in 1871.
He did in The Descent of Man. And it was just brilliant evolutionary reasoning. He didn't have the fossils we have now, but he looked at our closest living relatives, chimps and gorillas.
And they live in Africa.
Exclusively in Africa. So Darwin reasoned, well, if our closest kin are African, it stands to reason that our own evolutionary story probably started there too. He predicted an African origin.
And he was right.
Absolutely spot on. Decades later, the fossil discoveries, starting with things like Australopithecus, completely confirmed his prediction. It's a great example of the predictive power of evolutionary theory.
But the actual fossil record wasn't a simple, straight line from ape to human, was it? The book uses the metaphor of a hominin bush, shown in figure 21.6.
Yeah, bush is much better than ladder or line. For most of those 7 million years, it seems there were multiple different hominin species alive at the same time.
Coexisting. Maybe even competing.
Probably both. Living in the same landscapes, perhaps specializing in slightly different things. We see species with a mix of old and new traits, a mosaic evolution. It wasn't this neat progression we used to imagine. It was messy, experimental. Lots of branches on that bush just ended, died out.
Leaving just our branch.
Eventually, yes.
So let's trace that bush back towards the trunk. Near that 7 million year mark, what are the earliest fossils that start showing signs of moving towards bipedalism?
Well, there are some really early contenders like, say, Helandopus from Chad, maybe Orrorin from Kenya. The evidence is fragmentary, debated, but things get a bit clearer with the genus Ardipithecus found in Ethiopia. We're talking Ardipithecus cadaba and especially Ardipithecus ramidus ardi.
Ardi, I remember reading that. How old is Ardi?
Fossils date back over 4 million years, maybe 4.4 million for Ardi, and she's fascinating. Figure 21.7a gives you a sense. She definitely had some ancestral ape-like features, but her pelvis, parts of her legs, they show adaptations leaning towards bipedalism.
But not fully there yet.
Probably not fully committed. Crucially, her foot still had a grasping, opposable big toe, so she could likely walk upright on the ground, but she was probably still spending a lot of time climbing in trees.
Yeah.
A facultative biped, maybe?
Okay, so a transitional form. Then we get to Australopithecus and the famous Lucy. This is where the bipedalism before brains idea really comes from, right?
Exactly. Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis, is key. She dates to about 3.5 million years ago. Figure 21.7b shows her reconstruction. And the striking thing is her brain size.
Small.
Really small, about 400 cubic centimeters cc. That's basically chimp size. And she still had some other older features. Her face projected out a bit. She had large teeth. Her arms were quite long relative to her legs. If you just found her skull, you might not immediately think human ancestor.
But her body below the neck told a different story.
Completely. Her hip bones, her knee joint, her leg bones, they are clearly adapted for stable, efficient, upright walking. Not just occasional upright posture, but committed bipedalism.
And wasn't there other evidence around the same time?
Footprints. Yes. The Laetoli footprints in Tanzania, also dated to about 3.5 million years ago. Perfectly preserved in volcanic ash. And they show footprints made by individuals walking fully upright with an arch, no grasping toe, perfectly consistent with an Australopithecus foot like Lucy's.
Wow. So walking upright was locked in by 3.5 million years ago, even with a chimp-sized brain.
That's the takeaway. Bipedalism came first. It was the fundamental adaptation that set our lineage apart initially. The massive brain expansion came later.
So once that bipedal platform was established, then selection started favoring smarts. We start seeing bigger brains with the emergence of our own genus, Homo.
That's the pattern. Figure 21.8 tracks this increase in cranial capacity over time, and it's dramatic.
So after Australopithecus did around, say, 500 cc, who comes next?
We see early members of Homo, like Homo habilis, the handyman, called that because their fossils are often found with the earliest simple stone tools, Oldowan tools. Their brain size shows a definite jump, maybe 600, 700 cc. Not huge, but a clear increase over Australopithecus.
Suggesting tool use and intelligence were becoming more important.
Exactly. Selection was now favoring cognitive abilities alongside efficient walking.
And then the really big leap in brain size, and also the first species to leave Africa, was Homo erectus.
Yes, Homo erectus is a major turning point. Their cranial capacity gets much larger, approaching 1,000 cc in later individuals, almost double Lucy's brain size.
And they were much more sophisticated.
Seems so. They developed more complex tools, the Acheulean hand axe tradition. There's evidence they might have controlled fire, which would have been huge for cooking, warmth, protection. And crucially, they had the adaptability, the cognitive skills, the social organization, perhaps, to successfully migrate out of Africa and survive in totally new environments across Asia and parts of Europe.
Their bigger brain enabled that expansion.
It seems highly likely that increased intelligence was the engine driving their adaptability and success.
And then finally arriving at us, Homo sapiens. What's the average brain size today?
The modern human average is around 350 cc. So you see this overall accelerating trend over the last 3 million years strong, continued selection pressure favoring larger brains, and the intelligence that comes with it.
Even though that trend wasn't perfectly smooth, maybe?
No, there were probably periods of faster change and periods of relative stasis, but the overall direction is clear. And it's that brain power, built on the foundation of bipedalism, that ultimately allowed for the complex language, culture, and technology we have today.
Okay, so the story starts in Africa. Bipedalism, then bigger brains. But then, as you said, Homo erectus starts to move out. That's the first big migration wave.
That's right. Figure 21.9a maps this out. Around 2 million years ago, maybe a bit earlier, Homo erectus becomes the first hominin species we know of that successfully dispersed out of Africa.
And they went. Where?
Pretty much across southern Asia, into places like Georgia, Indonesia, China. Some populations might have reached parts of Europe too, though the evidence there is a bit more complex.
What allowed them to do that? Just the bigger brain?
Probably a combination of factors enabled by that larger brain. Better tool technology, maybe better communication and social coordination for hunting or scavenging, perhaps the use of fire for warmth and cooking, allowing them to cope with different climates and food sources. They are clearly adaptable pioneers.
So they established hominin populations outside Africa for the first time. But they weren't the last wave out, were they? There was a second major migration much later.
Correct. Much later, around 600,000 years ago, give or take. Figure 21.9b shows the second wave. This involved species often grouped under the name Homo heidelbergensis, who also originated in Africa.
And where did this second wave go?
They also spread into Europe and Asia, and crucially, these populations then evolved in situ in those regions. The group that established itself in Europe and Western Asia eventually evolved into the Neanderthals.
Our famous cousins.
Indeed. And the group that moved further east into Asia seems to have evolved into another distinct lineage we call the Denisovans.
Denisovans.
Yeah.
We know much less about them, right? Mostly just from DNA.
Mostly, yes. A few teeth, a finger bone found in Denisova Cave in Siberia. But their DNA tells us they were a distinct group, related to Neanderthals, but separate.
Let's stick with the Neanderthals for a minute, though, because they loom so large in the popular imagination, usually portrayed as, well, primitive cavemen.
Yeah, the classic club-wielding brute stereotype.
But Figure 21.10 in the book really pushes back against that, doesn't it?
Completely. That stereotype is just wrong based on the evidence. Neanderthals were a highly successful, intelligent, and adapted species that thrived in Eurasia for hundreds of thousands of years, often during brutal Ice Age conditions.
What were they like physically?
They were typically shorter and much more robustly built than modern humans. Thick bones, powerful muscles, broad chests and noses, probably adaptations to the cold climate, conserving heat.
And their brains, were they smaller?
Actually, no. On average, Neanderthal brain volume was slightly larger than the modern human average, sometimes over 1,450 cc, even up to 1,600 cc in some cases.
Wow. So definitely not small-brained.
Not at all. And their intelligence wasn't just potential. Their archaeological record shows real sophistication.
Like what kind of evidence?
They made complex stone tools, the Mousterian toolkit, which was more refined than earlier technologies. They were highly skilled hunters, capable of taking down large Ice Age game. They definitely controlled and used fire routinely.
And there's evidence of culture, social complexity.
Yes. We find Neanderthal fossils of individuals who survived severe injuries or lived to old age despite disabilities. That strongly implies they were being cared for by their group, evidence of compassion, social bonds.
Altruism, maybe?
Plausibly, yes. And perhaps most compellingly, there's evidence they buried their dead, at least sometimes. And in some graves, we find potential grave goods like tools or pigments. That suggests symbolic behavior, maybe ritual, complex thought about life and death.
So, far from primitive brutes, they were a sophisticated, successful sister species to us for a very long time.
Absolutely. They dominated Eurasia for a huge span of time, proving just how well adapted they were.
Okay, so Neanderthals and Denisovans are established in Eurasia, evolving from that second wave out of Africa. But back in Africa, our own species is emerging. When do we see the first Homo sapiens?
The earliest fossils that are clearly identifiable as Homo sapiens, are very close to it, appear in Africa around 200,000 years ago. Maybe even a bit earlier, depending on interpretations of finds like Jebel Irhoud in Morocco.
For a long time, we stayed in Africa.
It seems so. For over 100,000 years, Homo sapiens evolved, diversified, and spread within Africa, different populations adapting to different environments across the continent.
Then comes the third and final major migration event, the one that leads to us being, well, everywhere. The out-of-Africa expansion shown in figure 21.12.
This is the big one for non-African populations. It kicks off roughly 60,000 years ago, and the genetic evidence points to something really remarkable about this exodus.
What's that?
It seems that the vast majority of people living outside Africa today trace their ancestry back to an incredibly small founding group that left Africa around that time. Estimates vary, but maybe only around 2,000 individuals.
Only 2,000 people. That seems tiny to populate the entire rest of the world.
It's an astonishing bottleneck, isn't it? Think about it. Billions of people today descended from that small band of pioneers who ventured out 60,000 years ago.
How did they manage it? And how did we end up with the genetic diversity we see globally if the starting pool was so small?
Well, the diversity we see outside Africa accumulated after that bottleneck through new mutations arising over tens of thousands of years. And crucially, as we'll see, through picking up some genes from the hominins already living outside Africa.
Oh, interbreeding.
Yes. But first, just the speed of their spread is incredible. Once they left Africa, Homo sapiens dispersed rapidly. They reached Australia surprisingly early, maybe 50,000 or even 60,000 years ago. Europe and East Asia were colonized between roughly 40,000 and 60,000 years ago.
Getting to Australia that early, that means boats, right? Significant sea crossings.
It absolutely implies sophisticated boat building and navigation skills even back then. It's a testament to the cognitive abilities and adaptability of early Homo sapiens.
And the last major landmass, the Americas.
Reached much later, probably around 20,000 years ago, maybe a bit earlier, likely via the Bering Land Bridge, which connected Siberia and Alaska when sea levels were lower during the last ice age. From there, people spread rapidly south, all the way to the tip of South America.
So, in less than 50,000 years, basically, Homo sapiens went from a small African population to colonizing almost every habitable corner of the planet.
It's an unparalleled dispersal for a large mammal. Truly extraordinary speed and success.
Now, connecting this back to genetics.
Yeah.
You mentioned the bottleneck. How does modern DNA evidence confirm this African origin and the subsequent dispersal?
The genetic evidence is really strong. One key method involves looking at DNA that's passed down without recombination, specifically mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA, which you inherit only from your mother, and the Y chromosome, passed from father to son.
Why is no recombination important?
Because it means you can trace lineages back cleanly through time, like branches on a family tree, just by tracking mutations. When researchers build these gene trees for mtDNA and Y chromosomes from people all over the world, as shown in figure 21.13,
What does the pattern show?
the pattern is crystal clear. The very deepest branches, the oldest splits in the tree, representing the most ancient lineages and the greatest genetic diversity, are found only in people with recent ancestry in Africa. All non-African lineages form smaller branches that sprout off from within that African diversity.
So the root of the human family tree is firmly planted in Africa.
Exactly. It's powerful molecular confirmation of the out-of-Africa model and Darwin's original hunch.
Okay, so Homo sapiens leaves Africa, spreads out, and encounters these established populations of Neanderthals and Denisovans. Do they just replace them, or do they interact?
They definitely interacted. The story used to be simple replacement, but ancient DNA recovered from Neanderthal and Denisovan fossils has completely changed the picture in the last decade or so.
We have their genomes.
We do, remarkably. And when we compare those ancient genomes to the genomes of modern humans, Figure 21.14 summarizes what we find. Clear evidence of interbreeding. Hybridization.
So people alive today carry some Neanderthal or Denisovan DNA.
Many people do, yes. But interestingly, the pattern confirms the out-of-Africa sequence. Modern populations indigenous to sub-Saharan Africa generally have no or extremely little Neanderthal or Denisovan DNA.
Why is that significant?
It tells us the interbreeding happened after the ancestors of modern non-Africans left Africa and encountered these other hominins in Eurasia.
Okay. And was it just one mixing event?
It seems to have been more complex. There were multiple pulses of hybridization. For instance, it looks like there was an initial interbreeding event with Neanderthals somewhere in the Middle East, relatively soon after Homo sapiens left Africa. People whose ancestors went on to populate Europe and Asia inherited Neanderthal DNA from this event.
So Europeans and Asians both have Neanderthal DNA from that early encounter.
Yes. But then it seems the ancestors of modern East Asians experienced a second, distinct pulse of interbreeding with Neanderthals after they had diverged from the ancestors of Europeans. So East Asians tend to have slightly more Neanderthal ancestry than Europeans.
Fascinating. And the Denisovans, where did they leave their mark?
The strongest signal of Denisovan interbreeding is found in modern populations in Melanesia, places like Papua New Guinea, and among Aboriginal Australians. They carry a unique signature of Denisovan DNA that other populations lack.
So different groups of modern humans picked up different bits of ancestry from these archaic hominins depending on where they went.
Exactly. Multiple encounters, multiple legacies. And this wasn't just, random genetic noise. It seems some of the genes acquired through this interbreeding were actually beneficial.
They gave an advantage to the Homo sapiens populations.
Yeah.
Yes, adaptive introgression. It was like a shortcut for adapting to new environments. Instead of waiting for beneficial mutations to arise randomly, Homo sapiens could pick up alleles that had already been selected for in Neanderthals and Denisovans who had been living in those Eurasian environments for hundreds of thousands of years.
What kind of traits are we talking about?
Some classic examples relate to immunity. Certain HLA gene variants involved in fighting local pathogens seem to have come from Neanderthals or Denisovans. Genes affecting skin characteristics like keratin production might have helped with adapting to different climates or UV levels.
And you mentioned Tibetans earlier.
Right, that's a really striking example. Tibetans have a specific variant of the EPI1 gene that helps them thrive at high altitudes with low oxygen levels. Turns out they inherited that incredibly useful allele directly from Denisovans.
Wow. So interbreeding was actually a key part of our adaptive success as we spread across the globe.
It seems to have played a significant positive role. A reminder that evolution often works by borrowing and tinkering, not just creating everything from scratch.
Okay, before we get into the really high costs of being human, let's quickly revisit this idea of human variation and the concept of race. The book takes a very clear stance based on the genetic data.
It does, and it's a really important point to understand in light of modern genetics. When you actually measure genetic variation across the globe, where do you find most of it?
Not between big continental groups, right?
Exactly. The overwhelming majority of human genetic variation, something like 85% to 90%, is found within any local population. Pick any town or region, and most of the common human genetic variants will be present right there. The differences between major populations account for a relatively small fraction of the total diversity.
So two people from, say, Europe might be more genetically different from each other than one of them is from someone in Asia.
Easily, yes. Our species is incredibly interconnected genetically, despite the superficial differences we might see.
And those superficial differences, like skin color or height, they don't sort people into neat boxes either.
Not at all. Most visible human traits vary continuously across geography. They form gradients, or what biologists call clines. Skin color gets gradually darker towards the equator, lighter away from it. Body shape tends to follow climate rules. These clines blend populations together. They don't create sharp boundaries.
So given all that most variation is local, traits vary continuously. What does the book conclude about using terms like race or ethnic group in a biological sense?
The conclusion is pretty direct. From a biological standpoint, these terms aren't very useful. They imply discrete, separate categories that just don't match the reality of human genetic diversity, which is largely shared and continuously distributed.
So they can be misleading biologically.
They can. The book advocates using the more neutral, standard biological term population when discussing human groups and variation, just like we would for any other species.
Okay, good clarification. Now let's get back to that amazing, costly brain. We know when it got big, roughly,
Yeah.
but why? What drove that massive expansion after bipedalism was established?
The leading idea right now is the social brain hypothesis. And figure 21.15 illustrates the core evidence for it.
What's the correlation shown there?
It shows that across primate species, there's a really strong positive correlation between the size of the neocortex, the thinking part of the brain relative to the rest of the brain, and the average size of the social groups those species live in.
So species living in bigger, more complex groups tend to have bigger neocortices.
Exactly. The idea is that navigating a complex social world is incredibly demanding, cognitively speaking.
What makes it so demanding?
Think about it. You have to keep track of who's related to whom, who's dominant, who's subordinate, who owes whom a favor, who's allied with whom, who might be trying to deceive you. You need to cooperate, compete, learn from others, teach others, enforce social norms. It's a huge computational challenge.
So the argument is that the primary selective pressure driving brain expansion in primates, including us, was the complexity of social life itself.
That's the hypothesis. The social environment became the main arena where intelligence really paid off in terms of survival and reproduction. Selection favored individuals who could handle that complexity.
And based on the size of our neocortex relative to other primates, can we estimate the typical group size for our ancestors?
Well, extrapolating from that correlation gives a predicted group size for humans somewhere in the range of 100 to 200 individuals. This is often called Dunbar's number, after Robin Dunbar, who developed the hypothesis.
So we likely evolved in groups of that size where you could maintain meaningful, stable relationships with everyone else.
That seems to be the cognitive limit implied by our brain size, yeah.
Yeah.
The kind of group size where complex social dynamics would have been paramount.
And managing that level of social complexity, exchanging all that information, that must have required a revolution in communication, which leads us to language.
Absolutely. Language is the ultimate tool for managing complex social information.
We know from apes like Kanzi, shown in Figure 21.1 scene, that some basic symbolic ability was likely present in our common ancestor.
Right. Kanzi using lexicograms shows the potential for linking abstract symbols to meanings was there, but human language is way beyond that.
What makes it unique? The book mentions two key elements, drawing on linguists like Steven Pinker.
The two defining features are metaphorical abstraction and combinatorial structuring.
Okay, break those down. Metaphorical abstraction.
It means our words are arbitrary symbols. The sound dog doesn't resemble a dog. It's an abstract representation that we all agree on. We can use these symbols to talk about things that aren't here and now, the past, the future, abstract concepts like justice or love.
And combinatorial structuring. That sounds like grammar.
Pretty much, it's syntax. The rules that let us combine those abstract symbols in specific orders to create an almost infinite variety of complex meanings. Dog bites man is very different from man bites dog, even using the same symbols. That combinatorial power is uniquely human.
So why was developing this incredibly complex system so beneficial? What was the big fitness payoff that drove selection for the large brains needed to handle it?
The payoffs were enormous. Language allows for incredibly efficient and precise information transfer compared to, say, gestures or simple calls. But more than that, it enables cumulative culture.
Meaning we can build on knowledge over time.
Exactly. Information about tool making, hunting strategies, plant knowledge, social rules. It doesn't have to be rediscovered by each individual. It can be transmitted accurately across individuals and, crucially, down through generations. Language allows knowledge to accumulate.
Creating a sort of collective intelligence.
A collective, evolving intelligence. This creates a powerful, positive feedback loop. Better language allows for more complex cooperation and knowledge, which increases survival and success, which then favors individuals with brains capable of mastering and using that sophisticated language. Language and large brains likely co-evolved.
Okay, so we have these amazing, large, language-enabled brains, but we keep mentioning the cost. Let's dig into that. Figure 21.77 really drives home how energy-hungry our brains are.
It's a staggering metabolic cost. For an adult human at rest, the brain uses about 20%, one-fifth of your total energy budget, your basal metabolic rate.
Even though it's only about 2% of our body weight.
Exactly. It's incredibly disproportionate. And for infants and young children whose brains are growing rapidly, it's even higher, maybe Up to 60% of their daily energy intake goes just to fueling the brain.
That's a massive drain. Plus, we mentioned the childbirth issue, big heads, narrow pelvis due to bipedalism.
Right, another major cost associated with the large brain. Human childbirth is uniquely difficult and dangerous compared to other primates. A direct trade-off.
So given this huge energy tax from the brain,
Yep.
plus the costs of a long childhood and relatively high reproductive rate, how did humans manage to pay that bill? How are we paradoxical primates?
We seem to have solved the energy budget problem, at least partly, by evolving a higher overall metabolic rate compared to other apes of similar size. If you look at our energy expenditure relative to our lean body mass, fat-free mass, humans burn calories at a faster clip.
So we just run hotter, metabolically speaking.
In a sense, yes. That elevated metabolic engine provides the extra energy needed to fuel the expensive brain, support the long growth period, and maintain a relatively high reproductive output, all at the same time.
But just having a higher metabolism isn't enough, right? You need the fuel. You need high-quality food.
Absolutely. The demands of the large brain likely pushed our ancestors towards higher quality, more energy-dense food sources, more meat, perhaps cooked foods which are easier to digest. This dietary shift was probably crucial.
And this relentless need for reliable, high-energy food eventually led to the most radical change in human history, the agricultural revolution.
The biggest transformation, starting around 11,000 years ago, it wasn't just about getting more food, but about getting predictable supplies of high-calorie staples, mainly carbohydrates, to support larger, denser, sedentary populations.
And this wasn't invented just once and spread, was it?
Right.
Figure 21.18 shows it popped up independently in different places.
That's one of the most fascinating things. Agriculture wasn't a single genius invention. It arose independently in at least 7 or 8 different regions around the world within a few thousand years of each other.
Like where?
Well, the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East with wheat and barley, China with rice and millet, Mesoamerica with maize, beans, and squash, the Andes with potatoes, New Guinea with taro, each region domesticating their local plants and animals.
What does that independent invention tell us?
It suggests that once Homo sapiens had reached a certain level of population density, perhaps social organization and cognitive ability globally, the conditions were ripe. The pressures and opportunities favoring food production over foraging became strong in many different places around the same time.
Let's look at domestication itself. Box 21A in the book describes it as an evolutionary process, not just a human invention.
Yes, that's key. Domestication is co-evolution. Humans apply selective pressures, intentionally or unintentionally, and the target species evolves in response, becoming genetically different from its wild ancestors.
The earliest example being the dog.
Yes, the dog seems to be the first. Domesticated from wolves, likely in Eurasia, maybe as early as 16,000 years ago, possibly even earlier.
And they probably weren't deliberately bred as pets initially. The book mentions a commensal pathway.
Right. The idea is it might have started with wolves scavenging around human camps. Individuals that were naturally less fearful, more tolerant of humans, maybe got more scraps, survived better, reproduced more. So there was a kind of self-selection for tameness initially. Humans might have later actively selected for useful traits.
And with plants, we see similar evolutionary changes happening convergently in different crops around the world, these domestication traits.
Absolutely. It's remarkable convergence. Whether you look at wheat in the Middle East, rice in Asia, or maize in Mexico, farmers consistently selected for similar things.
Like what?
Bigger seeds are a common one, easier to plant and harvest, more food per seed. But maybe the most critical one for grain crops was losing the natural seed dispersal mechanism. Wild grasses shatter their seeds, fall off easily when ripe to spread themselves.
Which is bad if you're trying to harvest them.
Exactly. Farmers would have preferentially harvested and replanted the seeds from mutant plants that held onto their seeds longer. So selection strongly favored non-shattering varieties. That's a classic domestication trait.
But this intense selection often had downsides for the domesticated species themselves.
It often did. Domestication usually involves starting with a small number of individuals from the wild population. This creates a genetic bottleneck, reducing overall genetic diversity and increasing the impact of genetic drift.
Meaning random chance plays a bigger role in which genes become common.
Right, and that means slightly harmful mutations, alleles that might reduce disease resistance or overall fitness in the wild can accidentally become common or even fixed in the domesticated population. They're often less robust than their wild counterparts.
Okay, so agriculture provides more calories, allows bigger populations, but maybe creates less healthy crops and animals. And what about the impact on humans? This brings us to Jared Diamond's provocative phrase.
The worst mistake in the history of the human race.
Why would he call the foundation of civilization a mistake?
It's based on archaeological and anthropological evidence. When you compare the skeletal remains of early farmers to the hunter-gatherers who lived before them in the same regions, the farmers often show signs of being less healthy.
Really? How so?
More signs of malnutrition, dental cavities skyrocket with carbohydrate-rich diets, evidence of anemia from iron deficiency, signs of stress on bones. They were often shorter, too. And living in permanent, crowded settlements with domesticated animals created perfect conditions for infectious diseases to emerge and spread. Epidemics became a new feature of human life.
So a trade-off. More food security, maybe, but potentially poor individual health and new disease burdens.
That seems to be the paradox. Civilization was built, but perhaps at a significant cost to individual well-being, at least initially.
And because agriculture is so recent in evolutionary terms, just a few hundred generations for most populations, our bodies haven't fully caught up. We have evolutionary mismatches.
Exactly. That's the core idea behind many modern diseases of civilization. Our bodies, our metabolisms, our appetites were shaped by millions of years of evolution in a hunter-gatherer context environments where food was often scarce, varied, and required effort to obtain.
And now?
Now, many of us live in environments with near constant access to cheap, energy-dense processed foods, and we expend far less physical energy. Our ancient biology just isn't well suited to this modern environment.
Leading to?
Epidemics of obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, stroke, conditions that were rare or non-existent for most of human history. Our physiology is mismatched to our current lifestyle.
The book also mentions the hygiene hypothesis as another example of mismatch.
Yeah, that's the idea that our immune systems evolved expecting constant exposure to a wide range of microbes, parasites, and dirt from a young age. This exposure helps train the immune system to regulate itself properly.
And in our modern, much cleaner environments, with less exposure to diverse microbes, especially early in life,
The immune system might not develop properly calibrated responses. It might overreact to harmless things, leading to allergies and asthma, or even attack the body's own tissues, causing autoimmune diseases like Crohn's disease or multiple sclerosis. Rates of these conditions have soared in developed countries.
but it's not all bad news, right? Humans are still evolving. Agriculture created massive new selective pressures, and figure 21.19 shows we are adapting genetically.
Oh, absolutely. Evolution didn't stop 10,000 years ago. The shift to agriculture imposed incredibly strong selection, and we can see the genetic signatures of rapid adaptation.
The classic example being lactose tolerance.
Lactase persistence, yeah. The ability for adults to digest milk sugar, lactose. Most mammals and most human populations ancestrally lose the ability to produce the enzyme lactase after weaning. But in populations that started herding dairy animals, like in Europe and parts of Africa and the Middle East, mutations allowing lactase production to persist into adulthood provided a huge nutritional advantage.
And those mutations spread really fast.
Incredibly fast. The main European lactase persistence allele seems to have arisen and swept through the population only in the last 4,500 years or so. That's lightning-fast evolution, driven by the strong selective advantage of being able to drink milk.
It shows just how powerful cultural changes, like diet, can be as evolutionary forces.
Definitely. Our genes are still catching up to our culture.
Which brings us to the final big concept, cultural evolution itself and how it differs from genetic evolution.
Right. Cultural evolution is about changes in non-genetic information ideas, beliefs, skills, technologies, social norms, things that are transmitted through learning and imitation, not through DNA.
And the key difference is the speed and direction of transmission.
Exactly. Genetic evolution is mostly vertical from parent to offspring across generations. It's relatively slow. Cultural evolution can be vertical, but it's also horizontal, spreading rapidly between unrelated individuals within the same generation through observation, teaching, social media, whatever.
And diagonal, too, like from teacher to student.
Yes. This allows cultural traits, whether beneficial or not, to spread far, far faster than genes ever could. Think about how quickly a new technology, a fashion trend, or even a harmful habit like smoking can spread globally.
So cultural evolution can even spread traits that are bad for our genetic fitness.
Absolutely. If a behavior is socially prestigious, or psychologically rewarding, or just easily copied, it can spread culturally even if it reduces survival or reproduction. Culture has its own dynamics, often operating much faster than and sometimes decoupling from biological fitness. This capacity for rapid cultural adaptation is arguably what made Homo sapiens so successful at colonizing the planet.
Okay, let's try to pull some of these threads together with a specific example based on one of the problems at the end of the chapter. We established a really key timeline. Bipedalism evolved before the big brain boom. Lucy is the prime example.
Right. Upright walking came first, setting the stage.
So this means our common ancestor with chimpanzees, way back around 7 million years ago, wasn't an upright walker. They must have been adapted for a different lifestyle.
Logically, yes. More adapted to life in the trees, like modern apes.
Okay, so here's the puzzle for you, the listener. Drawing from problem one. Thinking about the skeletons of modern apes and early fossils like Artie or Lucy, what specific anatomical evidence points to that common ancestor being primarily a tree dweller, geared for climbing rather than stable ground walking?
Right, so what are the skeletal clues that betray that arboreal heritage? Features that make sense for climbing, but would actually hinder efficient bipedalism.
We talked about three main areas earlier that underwent major changes for us to walk upright. Those same areas should hold the clues to the ancestral state.
Okay, clue number one is in the overall body proportions. What about the limbs?
Apes, and even early hominins like Lucy to some extent, had arms that were relatively long compared to their legs. That's great leverage for swinging and climbing, supporting your weight in the trees.
Whereas modern humans have much longer legs relative to our arms, optimized for striding. Good. Clue number two, the feet.
The key feature is the opposable big toe. That ape-like grasping toe is perfect for holding onto branches, giving them stability and dexterity up high. Losing that was essential for our rigid, supportive foot.
Excellent. And the third clue comes from the core of the body, the structure that links the legs to the spine.
The pelvis. The ancestral condition seen in apes is a pelvis that is long and narrow. Good for climbing muscle attachments, maybe, but terrible for providing stability during upright walking, unlike our wide, bowl-shaped pelvis.
Perfect. So long arms, grasping feet, and a narrow pelvis. Those three skeletal features strongly indicate our ancestors, before bipedalism took hold, were primarily adapted for an arboreal tree-dwelling life. They're the echoes of our past in the trees. #outro.
So recapping today's deep dive.
Mm.
Wow, what a journey. 7 million years in the making. We started with our shared ape ancestry, traced the crucial foundational shift to bipedalism.
Followed by that incredible accelerating expansion of the human brain, which brought both huge advantages and significant costs.
We tracked the complex story of migrations out of Africa, not just one, but multiple waves, including Homo erectus, the ancestors of Neanderthals and Denisovans, and finally our own species, Homo sapiens.
And we saw how interactions and interbreeding with those archaic humans actually contributed useful genes to modern populations as we spread across the globe.
We also touched on why biological race isn't a useful concept, how our social lives likely drove brain evolution, and the immense power of language.
And finally, we grappled with the agricultural revolution. The foundation of civilization, yes, but also Jared Diamond's worst mistake, creating evolutionary mismatches between our ancient biology and modern lifestyles that we're still dealing with today through diseases of civilization.
It really highlights the tension between our slow genetic evolution and our incredibly fast cultural evolution.
It does, and we noted that despite the huge energy cost of our brains, it was really that rapid cultural evolution driven by language, cooperation, transmitted knowledge that allowed Homo sapiens to spread and dominate the planet so quickly and thoroughly. That adaptability, primarily cultural, is our hallmark.
Which leads to a final thought to leave you with. We saw evidence of incredibly rapid genetic adaptation in just the last few thousand years, like lactase persistence, driven by the cultural shift to agriculture. So considering the even faster, arguably accelerating pace of cultural and technological change today, how might that be reshaping our fitness landscape? What new selective pressures are we creating for ourselves, and how might our species respond, culturally or even genetically, in the centuries to come?
That's a huge, complex question about our future evolution in this rapidly changing world we've built. Definitely something to ponder.
Indeed. Okay, that wraps up our exploration of human origins. Next time, in our final deep dive of this series based on Vitua and Kirkpatrick's evolution, we'll bring it all together. We'll look at the intersection of evolution and modern society.
Yeah, we'll cover how evolutionary thinking is crucial for understanding everything from medicine and human behavior to agriculture, conservation, and tackling the biodiversity crisis. It's about applying these deep principles to our contemporary world.
It sounds like a really important finale. Don't miss it.
Looking forward to it.
Thanks for listening to Bookfulness. Join us for the next episode.